Hi everyone! Good day! By the way, I am Regine R. Ortiga. I'm here to talk about literary criticism. So, what is literary criticism? Literary criticism, the comparison, analysis, interpretation, and or evaluation of works of literature. The word criticism comes from the ancient Greek noun kritis, meaning judge. We also know from ordinary talk that means something like finding fault. However, literary criticism should not be defined as merely an activity of finding fault, for it goes far beyond that. The literary critic works for the reader as a companion and guide in addition to being a specialist in his or her profession. One of the qualities that he or she professes is objectivity. This means that revealing the true meaning and value of a work is of utmost importance. What is the function of a critic? So far as I am concerned, he can do me one or more of the following services. First, introduce me to authors or works of which I was hitherto unaware. So by the way, what is hitherto unaware? Based on my research, it means until now it is not known. So it introduced me to authors or works that until now, it is not known for me. Second, convince me that I have undervalued an author or a work because I had not read them carefully enough. So it means it convinced me that I don't value an author or work because I have not read it carefully. And third, show me relations between works of different ages and cultures, which I could never have sent for myself because I do not know enough and never shall. So it means it is show me connections between works of different ages and culture that I would never have seen on my own because I don't, or rather I did not know enough and would never have been able to see. So, the fourth one, give a reading of a work which increases my understanding of it. So, by reading or giving or reading materials, it increases my understanding or widen my understanding. So, fifth one, through light upon the process of artistic making means it gives a clear understanding process on how the works being made. So the sixth one and the last, through light upon the relation of art to life, science, economic, ethics, relations, etc. means it provides a clear information on our relationship to literary criticism in terms of life, science, economic, ethics, religion, and etc. This is why we read criticism. It directs our attention to subtle details and other interesting things in a piece of literature. And we trust in the expertise of the critic as well as in his or her opinions, while at the same time recognizing our lack of means to understand the text our own. However, in the level of professionals, it is natural to have differing opinions on a matter. This much is true in literary criticism. The important thing is that as readers, we should also discern for ourselves the plausibility of the literary critic's opinions and conclusions. Also, we should not look at a piece of literature as something distant from our personal everyday experience. After all, it is experience that a writer is conveying in his or rather conveying in his or her work. And then that's all for my part. Thank you and God bless us all.
New Historicism and Cultural Materialism. So the term New Historicism was coined by the American critic Stephen Greenblatt, whose book Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Mauve to Shakespeare 1980 is usually regarded as its beginning. A simple definition of the New Historicism is that it is a method based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts, usually of the same historical period. That is to say, New Historicism refused to privilege the literary text instead of literary foreground and a historical background. It envisages and practices a mode of in which literary and non-literary texts are given equal weight and constantly inform of interrogate each other. So typically, a new historical essay will place the literary text within the frame of non-literary text. Thus, Greenblatt's main innovation from the viewpoint of the literary study was to juxtapose the place of the Renaissance period with the horrifying colonialist policies pursued by all of the major European power of the era. Greenblatt himself referred to the appreciated historical document as the anecdote, and the typical new historicist essay omits the customary academic preliminaries about previously published interpretations of the play in question and begins with a powerful and a dramatic anecdote.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Soliano, and today we will tackle about cultural materialism. So, cultural materialism, the British critic Graham Holdernich describes cultural materialism as a politicized from a historiography. The term cultural materialism was made current in 1985 when it was used by Jonathan Delimore and Alan Senfield, the best known of the cultural materialists. As a subtitle of their edited collection of essay Political Shakespeare, cultural materialism promotes the idea that infrastructure consisting of material realities such as a technological, economic, and reproductive demographic factors mold and influence the other two aspects of culture. So here are the four characteristics in designing a critical method. First is the historical context undermines the transcendent significance traditionally accorded to the literary text. Second is the theoretical method signifies the break with liberal humanism and absorbing of the lessons of structuralism, post-structuralism, and other approaches which have become prominent since the 1970s. And third, political commitment signifies the influence of Marxist and feminist perspective and the break from the conservative question framework which hitherto dominated Shakespeare criticism. And last is the textual analysis that locates the critique of traditional approaches where it cannot be ignored. So, cultural materialism is a theoretical framework and research method for examining the relationship between the physical and economic aspects of production. So it also explores the values, beliefs, and world views that predominate society. So cultural materialism are further defined as culture will include all forms of culture. That is, this approach does not limit itself to high culture forms like the Shakespeare play. Materialism signifies the opposites of idealism. An idealist belief would be that high culture represents the free and independent play of the talented individual mind. The contrary materialist belief is that the culture cannot transcend and the material force and relations of production.
So hello everyone, my name is Chris Angelo G. Denebra and my topic is all about what is ethnic studies. So, ethnic studies is an interdisciplinary field of critical race studies that focuses on the four most historically aggrieved racialized groups in the United States, um, like African Americans, Native Americans, Latinas, and Asian Americans. Ethnic studies is the umbrella term that encapsulate the following scholarly disciplines like African American Studies, Native American Studies, Chicans and Latin Studies, and Asian American Studies. So, the continuation of this is the discussion or something like that. So, the continuation or the explanation of that statements is that ethnic studies can be taught through a hemispheric, a transatlantic, and transitional lens. The focus has always been communities of color in the U.S. In the Bay Area in 1968, as a result of Third World Liberation Front (TWF) strike at San Francisco State University, led by the Black Students Union (BSU), in collision with other groups representing Native Americans, Latins, and Asian students. In 1969, the TWF strike spread to UC Berkeley. Students' top demands were increased access to higher education for students of color, increased hiring of faculty of color, and the establishment of Black Studies and more broadly ethnic studies program and departments. So, following the TFW strike, these demands were taken up by campus activists throughout the US, which led to dozens of ethnic studies departments being established in American colleges and universities. Though interdisciplinary ethnic studies is not the same as cultural anthropology, a discipline that historically placed greater focus in minoritized cultural and ethnic groups outside the US, and has until recently ceded the study of urban American communities of color for the most part of sociologists. So there are some core values and principles of ethnic studies. So the values of humanization and critical consciousness shape the following guiding principles of teaching and learning in the field of ethnic studies. Together, these are two interwoven guiding values and 7 principles ethnic studies lessons should include. Ethnic studies courses teaching and learning will. So first is cultivate, which means empathy, community actualization, cultural perpetuity, self-worth, self-determination, and the holistic well-being of all participants, especially Native people and people of color. Second is celebrate and honor Native people of land and communities of color by providing a space to share their stories and struggle and resistance, along with their intellectual and cultural wealth. Third is center and place high value on pre-colonial, ancestral, indigenous, diasporic, familial, and marginalized knowledge. So the fourth is critique. Empire white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, xenophobia, patriarchy, capitalism, ableism, and etc. and other forms of power and oppression at the intersection of the society. So fifth is challenge. Imperialist or colonial homogenic belief and practices on ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized levels. So sixth is connect ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements that struggle for social justice on global and local levels to ensure the truer democracy. So next is conceptualize, imagine, and build new possibilities for post-imperial life that promote collective narrative of transformative resistance, critical hope, and radical healing. So that's all. That's all.
Good day, everyone. I am Ellen Grace G. Floreda, and today I am going to report about post-colonial criticism. So, when we say post-colonial criticism, it is frequently focuses on the relationships between the colonizers and the colonized people in terms of their literary texts. So what is colonialism? So colonialism is the acquiring of political control of a country affecting economics, language, and culture of a colonized country. So colonialism is a system. So it is a system or a principle involving the exploitation of a weaker people by a larger power. So uh, the methods of colonialism may include the domination, the subjugation, or the enslavement of the indigenous population and their land. Post-colonial studies. So the post-colonial studies focuses on the history of colonialism, its effects on people's culture, art, and literature. So as Jan Springhall observes in the colonization since 1945, approximately a third of the world's population live under colonial or imperial rule at the time that the Second World War broke. So, Bill Ashcroft, Garrett Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin are three um, figures who significantly oriented literary studies towards post-colonial studies. So, the characteristics of post-colonial criticism is that first, it focuses on the colonizers and the colonized people in their literary texts. So, and then second, it upholds or subverts colonial ideas. So basically, colonialism is a principle involving the exploitation of a weaker people by a larger power. So the subjects to consider in post-colonial criticism, it includes the gender, the economics, the race, the ideology. So these are the subjects that are under for considerations in post-colonial studies. So post-colonial criticism overlaps with some of the other critical schools of thought. What is post-colonial criticism? So it is the theory that focuses on the impacts of colonialism, mainly focuses on post-colonial literature. So written by citizens of of the former colonies. So they examine the way, so post-colonial criticism examine the way in which the writers from colonized countries attempt or to articulate their own experience. They also look at literature written by authors from colonizing countries about the colonized country or that relates to the colonial empire. So in this case, the critic may look how the authors from the empire attempt to use language to justify their dominance. It is also a genre of discourse employed by literary critics used to share the result of their interpretive efforts. So, post-colonial literary criticism frequently focuses really on the relationships between colonizers and colonized people in their literary text. So post-colonial criticism also analyzes whether a text upholds or subverts colonial ideas. So that is really the characteristics of post-colonial criticism. The next is the post-colonial theory. So the post-colonial, it includes many. So it first theory is it issues of power, economics, the politics, the religion, even the culture, and even the relationship to colonial hegemony. You can see that post-colonial theorists and literary authors engage issues in their theoretical and literary works in the 1950s and the 1960s. However, especially as countries around the world gained independence from the colonial powers. An example of this is Jane Austen, and Empire. It is by Edward Said. So this uh, literary text, Jane Austen and Empire, is written by Edward Said. So Edward Said highlights that in Mansfield Park, so Thomas Bertram would earn his money through the use of slaves in Antigua. So this makes the novel one of the first to record the processes of colonization. The slave planters are both central to the novel and marginalized due to their lack of explicit presence in the text. Said asked us to recognize the connection between the novel and the sordid history of colonization. So Said suggests that the West ideas of the East is often an eroticized or misinterpreted version of reality. So this text has had a big influence on the field of post-colonial study, including the significant theories such as Gayatri Spivak and R.C. Bucknor. Here are some examples. Samuel Beckett Murphy, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, Salman Rushdie, Midnight Children, J.M. Coetzee, Waiting for the Barbarians, George Orwell, Shooting an Elephant. So next is William Shakespeare, Othello, Antony, and Cleopatra, The Tempest. So these are these literature have been taken as key texts for the application of post-colonial mode of analysis. So here, what post-colonial critics do? First, the post-colonial critics challenge the idea that the Western perspective is the universal experience of the world, and show that limitations of the perspective of much canonical Western literature, particularly in empathizing with other cultures. The second one, also, they examine the author's depiction of culture that are different to their own. So the critics examine first if the authors depicts their cultures, or if the authors write regarding what their culture or that are different from their own. Then the third is post-colonial critics expose literature that is forcefully silent on more distasteful areas of colonial history, such as slavery. So in this, the critics exposes everything or every literature that more silent or that are more distasteful areas, like for example the slavery. They examine ideas of cultural difference and diversity in a vast amount of literary works. So they not only challenge the idea, but also they examine the ideas of cultural difference, so that they can write a literary works in a diverse way, or in a vast amount. They celebrate multiculturalism and cultural pluralism in which many ethnic groups enter into a dialogue with each other. So, and they collaborate without any group subjugating to the other or sacrificing their cultural identity. So, um, what is the best in this post-colonial critics do is that they not only focuses on their own culture in criticizing or in creating a literary works, but also they appreciate and even they celebrate multiculturalism, culturalism, and cultural pluralism. So since they are collaborating with the other culture or the other group, they are not subjugating each other, or one may sacrifice their own cultural identity, but they all diversely celebrate multiculturalism. The sixth is they focus on states of marginalization and otherness as a potential starting point for real cultural and national change, celebrating narrative voices from relatively marginalized group within literature. So this focuses on marginalization of the otherness. So thank you. That's all. Thank you. Any questions? So that's all for my part. Thank you.
Hello everyone. This moment we will talk about the feminist or gender studies criticism. So we have the key terms here. We have the gender roles, stereotypical representations of gender, and patriarchy. If we say gender roles, it is a theoretical construct that refers to a cluster of social and behavioral conventions that are typically considered to be socially appropriate costumes for individuals of a specific sex within a particular culture. And if we say stereotypical representations of gender, it is representations of gender that rely on stereotypes and therefore represent men or women as underdeveloped individuals. And last, we have the patriarchy. It means a social system in which men predominantly hold power in familial, social, and political spheres. So when we say feminist criticism or gender studies, it is focuses on the role of women or gender in a literary text. According to Bristler, central to the diverse aims and methods of feminist criticism is its focus on patriarchy, the rule of society and culture by men. It is also useful for analyzing how gender itself is socially constructed for both men and women. It also considers how literature upholds or challenges those constructions, offering a unique way to approach literature. So, feminist theory can be traced to the theories In 1919, however, Virginia Woolf formed the foundation of feminist criticism in her seminal work, A Room of One's Own. In this text, Woolf hypothesizes that Shakespeare had a sister called Judith, but that even if Judith had actually existed, Judith's gender would have prevented her from having a room of her own in which to write. As a result, Shakespeare's sister would not have gone to school, might have entered a miserable marriage, and would have either committed suicide or died a lonely death. If women write what they think, however, Shakespeare's sister will be born. Consequently, according to feminist criticism, patriarchy in its masculine focus structure socially dictates the norms for both men and women. So, for example, in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, Austen represents gender in characters' attitudes towards marriage. Elizabeth Bennet, the protagonist, initially um, scorns marriage, rhetorically asking, "What are men to rocks and mountains?" After falling in love with Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth's perspective of men and marriage changes. She then happily accepts Mr. Darcy's proposal. In contrast, Mrs. Bennet steadfastly views a good marriage as the highest achievement for a woman. Mrs. Bennet cites the marriage of one of her 5 daughters as the first object of her wishes since Jane, the eldest Bennet daughter, was 16. The Pride and Prejudice celebrates and subverts marriage as a societal expectation that, if not fulfilled, can render a man or woman as a socially inferior individual. The novel can be viewed as a subversive novel that challenges patriarchal power. So we have here questions to ask. These are men or women noticeably present in the text? If so, how? And next is consider stereotypical representations of women as the beloved, mothers, virgins, whores, and goddesses. Does the text refer to, uphold, or resist any of these stereotypes? How? And third, what roles have been assigned to the men and women in the text? Are the roles stereotypical? Do gender roles conflict with personal desires? And fourth, does the text paint a picture of gender relations? If so, how would you describe gender relations in the text? Or what are they based? What sustains them? What causes conflict between men and women? And last, are gender relations in the text celebrated, denigrated, mocked, mystified? If so, how? So we have also have here online examples, that is Harry Potter through the focus of feminist literary theory, examples of unfounded criticism by Kronoslav Nikolad. So in this online example, we have discussion, questions, and activities, or the feminist or gender studies. So we have here 5 questions. First, we have define gender, gender roles, patriarchy, and stereotypical representations of gender in your own words, and describe the relationship between culture and gender roles. How do culture and gender roles inform each other? And third, read Barbie Doll by Marge Piercy. Choose a stanza that you think most markedly represents or markedly represents how gender itself is socially constructed. What words, phrases, or lines in the stanza inform your choice? And we have compare and contrast how society treats and advises the girl in the poem with what she does after her good nature wears out, like a fan belt. Does the poem present the socially constructed nature of gender as positive? And last, we have the evaluate the rule that the lines consummation at last to every woman a happy ending. Play in the poem. Quote from the poem to support your interpretation. So these are the questions or the activities that needs to be discussed, that need to be discussed, and in relation to gender studies. So that's all my presentation, and thank you for listening.
So so before I would start, by the way, I'm Baby JJ coming. And so to explain what is the queer theory, so in literary criticism, there are three theories, which is the gender theories, the feminism theories, and also the last one is the queer theories. So in my part, I will explain what is the queer theories. So queer theories' origin is hard to clearly define since it came from multiple critical and cultural contexts, including feminism, post-structuralist theory, radical movements of people of color, the gay of lesbian movements of people of color. So, queer theory's origin is hard to clearly define since it came from multiple critical and cultural contexts, including feminism, post-structuralist theory, radical movements of people of color, the gay and lesbian movements, AIDS activism, many sexual subcultural practices such as sadomasochism, post-colonialism. So it shows there that queer theory as an academic talk came about in part from gender and sexuality studies that in turn had their origins from lesbian and gay studies at feminism theory. So it is much newer theory in that it was established in 1996 and contests many of the set ideas of the more established fields. It comes from this challenging the notion of the defined and finite identity categories, as well as the norms that create a binary of good versus bad sexualities. Queer theory's contention is that there is no set normal, only changing norms that people may or may not fit into making queer theories. Main challenge to disrupt binaries in homes that is this will destroy difference as well as the inequality. So, as you can see, the term queer theory itself came from Teresa de Lauretis' 1991 work in the Feminism Cultural Studies Journal difference title. So, queer theories, lesbian and gay sexualities. So de Lauretis proposes that the queer theory could represent all of these critics together and make it possible to rethink everything about sexuality. So that's only my part about the queer theory. So thank you everyone.
So, good day everyone. I am Apple Grace L. Abapo, and I'm going to discuss cultural studies together with my co-reporter Ana Marie Magbanwa. So, what is cultural studies? So, cultural studies is a discipline that cannot be categorized as a single academic school, but includes a broad variety of viewpoints: cultural studies, social criticism, sociology, and literary theory, as they relate to general study of culture according to Bruton 2015. So cultural studies researchers often focuses on how a particular phenomenon relates matters of ideology, nationality, ethnicity, social class, and gender. So, cultural studies is an academic discipline which combines political economy, communication, sociology, social theory, literary theory, media theory, film studies, cultural anthropology, philosophy, art, history, criticism, etc., to study cultural phenomenon in various societies. Cultural study is interested in the process by which power relation organize culture artifacts such as food, habits, music, cinema, sports, event, etc. It looks at popular culture and everyday life. So cultural studies believe that we cannot read culture artifact only within the aesthetic realm. Rather, they must be studied within a social and material perspective. For example, a novel must be read not only within the generic conventions and history of the novel, but also in terms of the publishing industry and its profits, its reviewers, its academic fields or criticism, the politics of awards, and the hype of publicity machinery that sells the book. And Ana Marie Magbanwa will continue the explanation about cultural studies.
Good day to all of us. I'm Ana Marie Magbanwa and I will continue to tackle the cultural studies. Discussion on cultural studies have gained currency with the publication of Richard Hogarth's Use of Literacy in 1957 and Raymond Williams' Culture and Society in 1958, and with the establishment of Birmingham Center for East Contemporary Cultural Studies in England in 1968. Since culture is now considered as a source of art and literature, cultural criticism has gained ground, and therefore Raymond Williams' term cultural materialism, while Stephen Greenblatt's cultural poetics and Bacton's terms cultural prosaic have become significant in the field of cultural studies and cultural criticism. The works of Stuart Hall and Richard Hogarth with the Birmingham Center later expanded through the writings of David Marley, Tony Bennett, and others. Cultural studies is interested in the process by which power relations organize cultural artifacts like food, habits, music, cinema, sport events, and etc. It looks at popular culture and everyday life which had hitherto been dismissed and as inferior and unworthy of academic study. Cultural studies approaches are first transcend the confines of a particular discipline such as literary criticism or history. Next is are politically engaged and reject the distinction between high and low, art or elite and popular culture, and the last one is analyze not only the cultural works but also the means of production. And that were all my part. Thank you for listening and God bless.